Okay, so here we are in sort of the end game of Age of Gods. I've run through, there's no real destiny phase here. There's nothing to do anymore. So I did the fortifications phase. Only one fortification chit remained, which was played by the God of Wisdom, who's been supporting the humans but showed some support for the elves. He just gave a fortification to the wood elves here. Basically, they're in a position more easily able to hit the dwarves. He wants to protect that position for whatever reason. Okay, so now we move forward with the actual attacks, and we're going to start off with our loving goblin gnomes, barbarians, and such. Attacks have a tendency to weave both ways, something I noted before, right? Goblins ended up expanding. The Chaos made a failed attack up here on the High Alps. I don't remember what the dwarves did. They were indeed the ones who went. They made, I don't remember, I don't think it was a success, so we'll skip to the next one here, which is what? The High Elves, yeah. They attacked here, defeated the Orcs. Actually got a 6 and got to roll again, I think. And I think they went for the Necromancers, which they failed on. The Orcs ended up coming back and hitting them, though. And that would be the Goddess of Peace here, who has still not played them, so they don't get any bonus for that. Not that I'd necessarily remember those things. A lot easier playing multiplayer to remember that you have a bonus, although I've seen a lot of games where people forget things like that, one side or the other. So now we're going to go to the action cards. So the cards were played. Now, one thing I mentioned before was that the dwarves attacked. They couldn't have. I'm not sure what happened, whether I used the Necromancers or if whatever. But whatever it was, it failed. So I'm just going to ignore it. But that would have been cheating had I done that with the dwarves. I'm not sure if I did or not. Okay, so starting off, the goblins played their card. That means they can no longer do attacks during the combat phase. They can do them during the card play. And they expanded their territory. Chaos played its mutations, trying to get into, and succeeding, this human city up here. And they get to keep the fortifications, which is huge. Over to the dwarves, they played the necromancers and brought the centaurs back into play. Over here, he played another dwarven fortress and built another one in another city that he has control over. He's in very, very powerful shape right now. This is for the High Elves under the God of Trickery. And now the God of Wisdom played his guerrilla warfare for his Wood Elves, and he put the bonus on the Wood Elves. They're now almost impossible to pull out of things. They've got a point of technology and 2 points of defense. They're going to be pretty tough. They've got all their counters on the board, so they just decided, you know, rather than trying to push things, the dwarves are no longer the big problem. The big dangers right now are the High Elves and the Orcs. And speaking of the Orcs, they finally played their card and launched an attack at +2. This actually was still hard to do because of all the bonuses there to try to take that city. They didn't succeed, but they see this way there. That's the end of this turn. We're on the very last turn. At this point, the God of Wisdom has to make his bets if he's making any, and then everybody gets one more set of rounds. There'll be really no fortifications, so there's just combat and action coming up. Well, we had some kind of random sniping going on, actually, because, so for example, he couldn't use Chaos, so he had to choose something else to use. Looks at his things, and ended up picking off a fairy with the lizard men. That helps him. Maybe people won't notice, maybe they won't care, because Chaos isn't doing well. Over to the next guy. He couldn't use his dwarves or necromancers. Damned if I know what he did. I think he did something kind of random, picking on, maybe firing the humans at the fairies. I don't really remember. The High Elves, though, gained some space on the orcs. And over here, I can't rightly remember what I did. I think it was the human. I think this was the human attack on the fairies, but I don't remember what happened at all here. I may be skipping people. It's hard to keep track in a game like this with all the cards and all the picking up and everything. It would work a lot better multiplayer, there's no question. Here are the halflings for Novalis. Marched in and took the Amazons on and knocked one of them out. Which made the next player kind of unhappy because they have Amazons as their bet, actually. But what they did was they took the gnomes and marched against a necromancer. Again, the idea being here, I'm not getting the points for it, and somebody's going to get 3 points if they bet on these, the fairies and the necromancer. That's got to be stopped. See if people can push those points into play or get big points otherwise off the action phase. That's all that's left. Okay, well, there was some heavy fighting. Not tremendous on the action card phase. Let's see what we had. Cave Network by Lizardmen. They actually snuck in themselves and took the Dark Elf City. That's an extra couple points that they got off that card. Cultural Exchange by the Centaurs. They swapped with the High Elves, getting an important city. The High Elves, what did they play? They played fairies and succeeded in an attack against the gnomes. Now the gnomes took that back and we'll see how they got it. But basically this gave the High Elves an extra attack. Of course, they were out of pieces at that point, so they had to move a guy and lose a fortress to do it. So they ended up losing a space by making that attack. Yeah, not losing a space because they probably wouldn't have been attacked in quite the same way. Over here, a holy war was declared by the ogres against the High Elves so they could grab one of their spaces. Over here, the halflings. This was just a bad set of cards. No choices here. 3 dead races, or 2 dead races, sorcerers and giants, filled their hand. They had the halflings. That was another not long ago alive. They might have been better off. Yeah, let's see what would have happened, because the fortification didn't matter. There was only going to be one person there. Let's see what happens if they roll for the giants. 6 is Civil War bonus. They get to bring them back. And it can be any territory. So given the situation, they're going to take this valuable pink city and make that the new giant home. I think that's a fairer thing. Otherwise, I don't remember what, something like this were the fortresses I built, which would have been silly. Okay, and then our final one, we played the Barbarians for a do-or-die attack, and the Goblins took it back. They just needed a 3 or higher, but they could have lost their own space for attacking. Alright, well, it's time to count the points. That's not a trivial matter, is it? Because I have to count per race. You know, I can count one race at a time fairly easily. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's all the pink's worth at this point. But then I have to add that to everything else they hold. And so I'm going to not do that on camera. I'll come back with some numbers for you. Well, I've counted up points, and they were somewhat surprising. Got a piece, for example. Orcs and halflings. 6 points for the orcs, 2 for the halflings, ends up at 8. Okay. That was my first calculation. This is somebody with 2 races down, the giants and the voracious. Thinking, okay, well, that's my baseline. We'll see. And it indeed is the worst we've got. Love ends up with barbarians at 6, goblins at 3. And that's it. Ah, I forgot their other races. They had the gnomes too. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more points that I didn't count. Gnome at 5. That puts them up to 14. That's a big score. That's for somebody whose main race wasn't doing badly, but everybody else's main race got pulled up to that. And their secondary race, the goblins, are doing quite well, actually. Or the gnomes, having been a bettable race. I don't think anybody bet on them. And what else did we have? We have the goblins kicking around, who weren't a bad race either. Okay. And actually the goblins got activated earlier, so they would be the secondary. So that's pretty good. Death had Chaos and the Lizardmen. Chaos has 4 points scattered around, some from that Chaos infection there. The Lizardmen, a last turn stab, up at 10. Okay, they're not doing too badly. And it looked like they were doing pretty horribly with Chaos for the, the last 2/3 of the game, really. The God of War, what did he have? The Dwarves, who had looked like they were running away from it at one point, only have 5 points on the board at this point. The Necromancers are at 1. Well, they were only going to be at 2 anyway. The Centaurs are at 2 because they're swap. The Gargoyles are worth a point for existing. And so far we've had a couple of bets on the Amazons, which was, they actually attacked them. The Necromancers, which looked like they were going to succeed until the last turn when everybody picked these off. War had a bet on the Fairies, similar situation. All game they looked like they were fine there, and the bets just don't pay off, right? Okay. We go to Trickery, who went into this turn looking golden, but the High Elves only ended up being worth 5 points because people really bashed them, and it's easy to do that in this. The Fairies were worth a point for them over there, no biggie there. Nomads ended up big, 4 points. That's, almost as much as they got off of their High Elves that they've been fighting all game, just by keeping something secret. That kind of troubles me a little bit. And then they pulled off a bet, a successful bet on the Wood Elves. That's worth 3 more points, put them up to 13. Now they're in second place at this point. Before, when I first added things up, I forgot about Love having the gnomes, and I'm thinking, okay, Trickery managed to pull it out ahead anyway. Well, it's not quite the case. Let's look at the last. The humans were worth 6 points here for the God of Wisdom. The Woods Elves were worth 4. Kind of weird that nobody attacked those, actually. But, okay. And if you're keeping track of cards, especially in the 6-player game, you might have a pretty good idea, hey, somebody probably bet a Wood Elf. Not only because it's red, but because you know how many red cards. I don't know how many people play that carefully. Usually in games that I play of other types of things, nobody's playing that carefully. If they are, they're probably really annoying. But anyway, they had the Dark Elves, who ended up getting battered down by the surprise attack, only down to 2 points. And the Ogres, who ended up squeezing up to 2. That added up to 14 as well. So we have a tie for it between Love and Wisdom. And then Trickery in the second. The big evil ones like, Death and War and Peace didn't do well. Anyway. It's definitely a very chaotic game. Planning can have a lot of effect, but I think one of the biggest things is avoid looking like the guy who's in the lead at the wrong times, which is really almost any time. Always try to keep somebody ahead of you until the last turn and make the stab. A lot of games that are like this, and maybe as people become, more adept at this particular game, they might not target the bunny as much, but it's so fluid and so flexible, you never want to be in that top position, at least not close to the end of the game, because you can be wiped out so hard there. Indeed, I think everybody, the only person who was out of the top 3, Yeah, it's kind of funny. The two people in the top three were actually in that position. The humans and the high elves were two of the more impressive looking ones. So maybe I'm just lying to you and telling you bad advice. It's the feeling I have, though. Games that are this chaotic, quite often the flow is just too hard. On the other hand, sometimes it's not easy to make a big gain in this game. One of the best things, if you're pretty sure on a bet, that's a nice pocket of points. But if you're not sure of it and you don't know how it's going to turn out, and somebody lucks into their bet because nobody was able to really predict and stop it or whatever, it would be really annoying if somebody counted points in this thing, though, towards the end of the game. That would really slow it down. So my hope would be, if I was playing it, that people didn't take it too seriously. I'm not saying they're not trying to win, but that they don't stop and start counting. I only need 3 more points. I hate that in History of the World, and I would hate that here. All right, this one's going up. I'll come back with a review.